Hey everyone, this is Jane with Barlow Herbal, and in this video, I'm excited to share with you some information about a plant that is mostly considered a weed. And this plant is also called pokeweed or poke root. Now, this is something I've been familiar with for most of my adult life because poke root is in one of my dad's original very popular formulas, and that is our anti-candida blend called Mycocyde. Now, I have spotlighted the other herbs that are in this formula, and that is lomatium, sarsaparilla, and cayenne pepper. And then in the smallest amount in this formula is the little known poke root. And this is considered a invasive weed. Most people who have gardens and want to plant things in their yard do not plant this plant for just something that looks beautiful, something that, this is not something you want in your yard because almost every part of it is considered toxic or even poisonous, especially by modern herbalism and modern herbalists, because if you know what you're doing with it and you have respect for what it does, it reminds me a little bit of bloodroot. Can be extremely healing, but it's got to be in the right doses with the right preparation. So I actually did a deeper dive into some of the information about this plant because while I've personally used it pretty extensively throughout my life because I love Mycocyde. It's such a beautiful formula. I go through either a 2 or 4 ounce bottle of this once or twice a year, and I have for most of my adult life. And if I've ever had bouts of candida, I'll put this into my routine for a few months until I can get that cleared up. So this is a formula I'm extremely familiar with. I love all the plants in it, but I wasn't super familiar with poke root. So I got to do a deep dive. I actually found some beautiful notes in my dad's, some of my dad's notes. I've found some really great things that added a layer of just beautiful knowledge and information about how some of our traditional herbalists and people who studied botanical medicine, how their brains used to work when putting together formulas. And I found some really amazing stuff. So first of all, I wanted to share with you the origin of poke root, and it does grow everywhere. So this is where it originated. So it's native to Eastern and North America, parts of Canada, Mexico, and the Caribbean. And because it spreads so rapidly and so easily, it's also been naturalized in Europe, Asia, and parts of South America. So if you know what to look for and you know how to identify it, there's a lot of places that you will see it. Now, this is where it thrives: disturbed soils, the edges of forests, fields and roadsides, gardens and farms. It tolerates a lot of things like not very well, nutrient dense soil. It can grow almost everywhere. But this is definitely something you want to pay attention to if you're trying to identify it, to possibly very carefully put it into your apothecary. But this is where the deep wisdom comes in. And this has added a whole nother layer of just like stunning respect that I now have even more for the work my dad did and his deep wisdom and knowledge. He was so humble about the things that he put together and brought out. And I just don't cease to be amazed at how incredible his brain was as I've continued his work and just the layers of information and the wisdom that he brought to the things that he formulated. So here are some traditional uses. Now, historically, poke root was used in American folk medicine, Appalachian herbalism, and early eclectic medicine. And I'm going to expand on that eclectic medicine in just a little bit because this is an important piece of the way my dad formulated his herbal remedies. Okay, so this is what some of the traditional uses were. Now, before I go into them, let me just say that the information I share is for education and entertainment purposes only. Please use your own due diligence, do some deep research when you're using any type of herbal medicine on any level. In fact, poke root reminds me a little bit of bloodroot, where a little tiny bit can make a massive difference, and too much can make a massive difference in not a good way. So you need to really know what you're doing with some of these things and how they how they work together. So this is what it was used for historically in some of these traditional ways. Lymphatic system support, because it was believed to stimulate the lymphatic circulation. Anti-inflammatory remedies, because in small doses, in tincture form, it was used for swollen glands and rheumatism. Immune stimulation, because sometimes it was used for that reason in old herbal remedies. If you add just the right amount, it can have just the perfect effect on your immune system. And then in topical treatments, it was applied externally for skin conditions and skin infections. Here's the thing that I found really interesting. Poke root is not something that you want to make a tea or a decoction, because what it does is that extracts all of the toxic parts of poke root. Now, not just the root is toxic at the wrong preparation and the wrong amounts, but the leaves, the mature leaves, and the berries. So this is another reason most people don't put this plant purposefully in their yard or in their garden, because from the research I've done, it's not just toxic for human beings, it's toxic for your pets as well. And if there are animals that will come and graze in your yard, if you have a place where maybe deer wander into your yard, this is not something that you want available to them, because it is toxic, especially at high doses. Now, in just the right preparation, which the part of the plant that you use, the root, it can be an absolute powerful piece of an herbal remedy if it's done just the right way. And typically, herbalists throughout the centuries have made an alcohol extraction from the root. And the root, when it's harvested in the fall, which is the time that root medicines are typically harvested. And then when you make a tincture of it, it actually extracts the exact right properties. It acts as a preservative. And then you can control the dose literally one drop at a time. And that's the beauty of an herbal tincture. And this is something that my dad had perfected, and we still to this day create very powerful, very, amazing in my perspective, herbal remedies that are in alcohol based, because you can not only control the dose, but goes right to the bloodstream. It's very quick acting. And this is where the brilliance of a botanist or an herbalist, when they're putting together a formula in just the right amounts for each of the herbs that are in it, this is really where the deep wisdom comes in. And it's something I actually really love. So here's some information I found about the toxicity of poke root, okay? Because I think it's really important. All parts of pokeweed or poke root are poisonous to humans and animals, and especially the roots, the mature leaves, and the berries. A symptom of a poisoning, if maybe you have an animal that you hike in the forest with them or and they eat some, is severe vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, low blood pressure, and respiratory issues. So this is if this is consumed. In fact, what's interesting is that some of the Native Americans used to, in times when food was hard to get, they would take the poke root and they would boil it. It would go through several different processes of heating, boiling, mashing, and they would remove all of the toxic elements so that they could actually eat what was left. They knew that it was toxic to humans, but sometimes in times of famine, they would need to use it or consume it as food. But that, was very, very, very rare. Many modern herbalists avoid internal use entirely or only use extremely controlled doses. This is not something you want to boil up and make a decoction or a tea. If you learn about the things that you start consuming as plants and plant medicine and herbs, this is one of those things that you add a layer of knowledge and wisdom to putting these things into your routine or into your apothecary, and you understand that the dosing in a controlled manner is extremely important. In the southern U.S., young pokeweed shoots, so the stalks, historically were eaten as poke sallet, S-A-L-L-E-T, which after repeated boiling, it removes the toxins. So besides the Native Americans, in the Appalachian area, they actually used the young shoots, boiled it down until none of the toxins, can you imagine going through the process of learning that something's toxic and going, okay, well, let's see if we can still consume this by repeated boiling over and over and over again, and until you discover that then now you can actually eat it. Like, it's such an interesting progression of how human beings have taken different plants, not just use them for medicine, but use them for food as well. I find that so fascinating. So this dish appears in Appalachian and Southern food traditions. So fascinating. And then this many botanists and herbalists from the mid 20th century worked with plants like pokeweed in ways that modern herbalism has become more cautious about. So I think that when you bring out herbs in a more of a way that affects the masses, where more and more people have access to these things, this is where modern medicine and herbal medicine has erred on the side of caution, which I think is extremely smart. Because in the case of pokeweed, or even like a couple weeks ago, I dropped a video on bloodroot, the same thing. You want to err on the side of caution and not use it at all unless you know exactly what you're doing with it, okay? So here's what I found, why some modern herbalists still use pokeroot. And here, I think it's divided. I think that from my conversation with different herbalists over the years, different, naturopathic doctors who are familiar with herbs, they're divided on it. And rightly so, because to me, it's better not to use it than to use it the wrong way. Okay, so traditional practitioners still believe that pokeweed is great for a lymphatic stimulant, immune modulator, an antiviral herb, and an alternative, something for a blood and lymph cleanser. Okay, and that's what it was historically used for. Now, the modern cautions are this, because modern herbalists today, they either do this, they avoid it internally completely, or they only use it externally, or in extremely diluted formulas, which I honestly think that that's the best way to do it. The main concern, I think, for most people and herbalists who use this is that there's an extremely narrow margin. And this is where, as I dug into this and the formula my dad put together, that this is the only formula that we make that includes pokeroot. And because I have his handwritten notes with his formulas, I know the exact amount that pokeroot is in this blend. And it's, from my perspective and my research and having made this formula for myself and my family, it's perfection. It's absolute perfection. This is what I found based on someone in my dad's era, with the things that he knew as a medicinal botanist, the things that he studied, the people he studied with. I believe that this is what fits in his category. So in his era, this is what my dad believed. Candida involved a systemic imbalance. Okay, so it's not just about taking one herb. Like many people know, an herb like Phytolacca is really good for candida and candida overgrowth. And this is something that I love. I love Phytolacca. I drink it in a tea on a regular basis because I love the taste of it. And I know what it does for our body, the propensity our body has for candida and different kinds of yeast and overgrowth because of the sugar, the overuse of antibiotics, all of those things. But that's one thing. But if you think about candida, there's multiple layers why the body creates an overgrowth of candida. It's a systemic imbalance. And here's what his formula does. And this is so beautiful. So the pokeroot is for immune and lymphatic. Okay. The sarsaparilla is antifungal and it helps the body detox. Lomatium, we all know its beautiful antimicrobial properties, including yeast and fungus. And then cayenne for circulation and absorption. The conclusion I came to, my dad's strategy in putting these 4 herbs together is immune stimulation plus antimicrobial action plus improved circulation plus detoxification. I mean, the more that I study these little known plants and why they're in my dad's blends, the more respect and appreciation I have for the deep wisdom and knowledge that he had. It never ceases to amaze me. And I don't think it ever will until either I pass on or whatever happens, okay? That made it sound like I might plan on living forever. Who knows? Okay. So there's actually something called eclectic physician. So this is an interesting historical note that I found and I knew, but I never really brought it to the spotlight. So there's a period of time between the 1800s and the mid 1900s. And these physicians were called eclectic physicians. And they used pokeweed in formulas like this: chronic infections, disorders in the glands, and different blood conditions. And the way my dad formulated this actually reflects the way he formulated. So even though I never had a conversation with him that specifically said he was basing his knowledge and some of his formulations on the eclectic physicians and the way that they formulated, that makes perfect sense. Here's what I wrote. My dad's combination reflects deep botanical knowledge rather than random herb mixing. Okay. It's a thoughtful formula, the way he formulated, from a tradition where practitioners tried to influence multiple body systems simultaneously. This is bringing the whole into the one instead of going after just one issue. It's like, why is this happening in the body? Let's go after the cause that affects all these systems. And to me, that is really beautiful. So here's something interesting I found out about the eclectic physicians. They were a uniquely American medical movement, active from roughly 1830 to 1930. So you have to think about what happened at the beginning of the 1900s, where think about the whole story of the Rockefellers and how they demonized botanical medicine and herbal medicine and chiropractic and all of the things that helped humans connect to Mother Nature and keep us healthy. This was demonized, but this group of physicians that really leaned heavily on botanical medicine for 100 years was really starting to gain some beautiful momentum. Okay. They relied heavily on botanical medicine and wrote extremely detailed materia medica texts. And it made me want to go through and not only some of my dad's old books and old stuff he's had that it's so fun to go through these things, but to really look at it and see if I could start collecting some of this materia medica texts where they wrote extremely detailed information about the things that they were learning and discovering. Okay, so the cool thing is in my research, what I found is that pokeweed was one of the most discussed herbs. This is a little known herb that's considered a weed, but this was one of the most discussed herbs in the materia medica that was written down during that 100-year period. And I know for a fact that my dad loved this kind of stuff. I just never really put that word eclectic into that. Here's how Eclectic viewed poke root. This is what I found. They described it as systemic metabolic corrector, lymphatic stimulant, glandular remedy, and anti-rheumatism. Okay. Common indications in the old eclectic text included swollen lymph nodes, mastitis, which is, I actually had mastitis when I gave birth to my first child and I was breastfeeding. Oh, mastitis was horrible. So swollen lymph nodes, mastitis, chronic skin eruptions, tonsillitis, rheumatism, and glandular enlargement. So this is written about extensively in these old texts. There's a famous eclectic physician that I found. His name is John Uri Lloyd. He wrote extensively about these different preparations in all of the literature. This is part of their dose philosophy, which I found it so interesting. So eclectics were extremely careful with dose. They emphasized this: small doses stimulate, large doses poison. And I think that's really important to indicate that here again and reiterate it, because in the small dose, something magical like herbal medicine can make a completely different formula, especially when it's blended with other herbs to treat the whole part of an issue that a human being is having. So this is how I'm going to finish this. This philosophy is exactly how modern herbalists still treat pokeweed. If you really study herbalism on a level where you go back to ancient texts, you go back to all of that, and then you add in the layer of the scientific research that we're so lucky to be able to do now, just from, all of the information that we can gather. And then you have the testing and all of the stuff that modern medicine brings, all the good stuff. There's a lot of good stuff because we can, do testing and we can see what are the exact alkaloids and what are the properties of this plant that make it toxic? What are the properties that make it healing? And we can study this on a more scientific level. And then we can bring in the ancient wisdom that is so beautifully described in some of these ancient texts. And then we can marry the two together to help bring this to more people who I believe are searching for the magic of Mother Nature and how she is here to help us heal. So I'd love to know what you think about pokeroot or pokeweed. This is a very cool plant that just needs a little bit of knowledge and care, or a whole lot. Definitely something I would not put in your garden because it's very hard to get rid of. It's considered a weed, and it grows 6 to 10 feet tall, and it's not great for human consumption or for animals. So let me know what you think about pokeroot. Is this something that you've never heard of? You saw it, maybe you've been using our Mycocyde for years and you see it as one of the ingredients. It is the one that's in the tiniest amount in this formula, but maybe you really never heard of it or understood what it did on this level. So thank you for tuning in. I'd love to know what you think about this, and we will see you next time.